This gave us a whole different targeted audience. It also decluttered our primary social media channels. When we developed this HCP channel, it was really focused on physicians and providing information on clinical results. We found that the engagement was comparable to our corporate channel. We're talking about the medical channel had 1 to 2,000 followers, and the corporate channel had 30 or 40,000 followers. By segmenting them out and really micro-targeting this audience, we saw incredible engagement metrics that you wouldn't find with a larger audience.
Welcome to Content Matters, the podcast in which we go behind the scenes of content that builds trust in high-stakes environments. Today I'm speaking with Sam Rebbechi, who's Digital Manager at Telix Pharmaceuticals. Today we're going to be digging into 3 themes that have changed the way that Sam works, and those are segmentation, information as a product, and also we look at a winning campaign that was around prostate awareness. So welcome, Samuel. How are you today?
Great to be on the show, Natalie. Appreciate you having me on. I'm going well.
Thank you. How about we start with 1 or 2 sentences that sums up Telix Pharmaceuticals, and then also how you landed in digital health.
It's funny you say 1 or 2 sentences because that kind of hits the nail on the head of how difficult it is to communicate this company. At its heart, Telix is about seeing and treating cancer. We develop diagnostic products that help physicians better see the cancer, and we also develop therapeutics that help those same physicians treat it in a more targeted and personalized way. So those together, we call the sort of philosophy or approach behind combining those two theranostics, so a combination of theranostic and diagnostic. And the idea is that we're creating products that are more accurate, personalized, and targeted to the patient. So they have less side effect and they're able to benefit more greatly from the treatment they're receiving.
Thank you for that background. Let's start where your career began. How did you end up in digital health, and what did good content look like for you then versus what good content looks like for you now?
I've always had a sort of digital marketing focus. So I did marketing at uni, and then my first role was in a digital marketing agency. That really was in the golden era of content marketing. So when SEO was a real big part of these agencies, I got a great insight into what is possible with content, what kind of engagement it can drive, traffic it can drive, and real business outcomes that it can drive, particularly when it's well researched and targeted in the right way. I think we've seen over the years the content space on social media and websites has just become cluttered and busy. It's become even more important for us to refine content and make sure it's captivating, engaging, and delivers an outcome for the organization. You have to make your information stand out. You're not competing against your competitors, you're competing against every other piece of content that's in the feed.
Was there a moment when you realized in your career that the same content is not across multiple channels, just isn't working? This one message everywhere approach just is a flop?
A real moment for me was at Telix when I first started in the role, and I went in with the sort of standard approach of taking our corporate announcements, and then we just developed the content around that announcement and put it out on our socials. We were finding there were so many announcements coming out, particularly around research publications, other smaller announcements, collaborations. There were so many other different varying kinds of content that we felt could get put out, but it was just creating this sort of cluttered mess of information on our corporate social media accounts. It was hard for users to be able to differentiate what was important news and what was more niche news. And one of the ways that we were able to get around this was to focus on developing a HCP, healthcare practitioner or healthcare professional or a medical channel for Telix. This gave us a whole different targeted audience. We found segmenting that out gave us a real great way to engage with a really important segment of our audience almost directly and speaking to them in how they want to be spoken to. But it also decluttered our primary social media channels so that it could really focus on broad, important corporate announcements. When we developed this HCP channel, medical channel, it was really focused on physicians and providing information on clinical results. We found that the engagement sometimes was comparable to our corporate channel. And we're talking about the medical channel had 1 to 2,000 followers, and the corporate channel had 30 or 40,000 followers. By segmenting them out and really micro-targeting this audience, we saw incredible engagement metrics that you wouldn't find with a larger audience.
When you had that moment or that decision to launch an HCP specific channel, what was the first thing you published and how did you go about creating a plan?
The initial calendar, I think, really was just teeing up all the recent publications that had come out. So there are links through to medical journals. We did find over time we began to develop content that was more native to that page. One philosophy I have with all this content we create is that you are only going to have a certain percentage of people click through and actually read what's behind a link. I try to, in all the design, to draw out as much information as possible into that social media feed. For example, we had top line results come out for our kidney cancer imaging agent for a phase 3 study. When they came out, we took the key findings and we reduced them down to just a few sentences and then had that in a nice sliding carousel. People who were scrolling, they didn't even have to click into a website to understand what the impact of these trial results were. They could just, with a few flicks of their thumb, briefly go through and understand it. These kind of posts had great engagement. It allowed us to get our message out a lot more often and connect it with a lot more people than we would if we just posted a link.
I love the way that you're talking about how can I frame this content in a way that people don't have to click through, that we're still sharing what we want to share with healthcare professionals. Here's a question. How do you justify that as ROI or success if people aren't clicking through? Has it always been a strategy from day one to measure success by impressions or the number of people who roll through that carousel rather than an action or a transaction or an inquiry?
It's a real mix. And if you're in a business where you're trying to get an action that requires maybe a purchase of a product or such, then you're going to have very different ROI. For a lot of what we're doing, particularly when we're talking about clinical research and talking about trials that we're running and talking to physicians, we really just want our message to be seen and heard and understood. The information itself is the product. As long as
Mm,
that's been read, been digested, then that's ticking a
mm.
box. I think it's a default in digital marketing, digital communications that you need to have someone click through or fill something out. I would challenge people just to think about what is the actual return that you want. Is it just growing awareness of your brand and what you're doing and your mission? So just think about what sort of part in the funnel your content is feeding into.
And you mentioned there information as a product, which I think is a really important way to look at content for health. Can you define information as a product for our listeners for us?
Thinking of information and product is really thinking about how you design it in the same way you would design a product. When we put a product to market, we're really thinking about how that fixes a need or a problem that a key demographic or target audience has. So thinking of information product simply is thinking about what does the audience need from this information, then providing them that information, as simple as that. That can happen by keeping your message broad and enabling it to be understood by a broad audience, or it's by creating individual pieces of content that speak to those individual audiences. And just by the way you present the information is kind of selective. If you're talking in a particular way to a physician, providing certain information, only physicians are going to really understand or engage with it. While if you're talking to investors, having a different form of content is going to select them as the audience. We always try to think of different ways we can cut and dice announcements or key bits of information we want to get out there so that it's digestible by each of those key target
Yeah.
audiences.
So, alongside information as a product, as a principle for the way you generate content, we combine that with the fact that you really highly value segmentation as a key activity because that's how you get the right message or you can slice and dice that right message to the right people. Can you give us an example of where you have taken information as a product and sliced and diced it for three different audiences?
One of the examples that comes straight to mind is we made an acquisition of a portfolio of FAP targeting agents. This is fibroblast activation protein targeted agents. And it's a really cool area of research because fibroblast activation proteins are present on the surface of lots of different tumor types, lots of different cancer types. So drugs that target this particular protein potentially could be used to treat a very wide range of cancers. We did understand, though, that doing this announcement, people wouldn't necessarily understand the place of these assets in our portfolio. We also understood there was a great interest in the research community about this, so we knew there'd be a lot of excitement and they want to know exactly what these assets are and what they're capable of doing. We knew we had this kind of big disparity between people who had a lot of knowledge in the space in our audience and people who just would have no idea what we're talking about when we're talking about fibroblast activation protein. So we decided for the announcement of this acquisition that we would split it up between just a broad corporate announcement. And then we also had the scientific explainer, which was really sort of simply explaining the potential of targeting this protein and why it's so important and innovative. And we also had the KOL or key opinion leader interview with a researcher in the space on our medical channel that really spoke to people in the know. Who knew who the researchers were. He was quite well known and it could align his objective view on it with our announcement. And we just saw some awesome engagement across all those different pieces of content.
And what were
Um,
those signs that it was a winning piece of content?
for the scientific explainer, this was a interactive article. So you might have seen on BBC some news sites, data-driven articles where you scroll through, see the numbers move, and see some nice graphics. We did that kind of style content on the website for the explainer, and we saw really good engagement and stay time on that page. So we knew people were finding it valuable and reading to the end. And then it was really video views on the HCP side of things on the medical channel. We saw good levels of video views, long video views, and that was what we were looking for.
Excellent. Thank you. Looking back at that particular example and how that informs your approach now, would you recommend that approach to others?
Yeah, I think you always got to consider again what kind of audiences you want to connect with. But I would challenge everyone to really sit down and think closely about what audiences you're speaking to. I think in a broad, we're almost always speaking to investors, physicians, and then a broader audience that's a mix of maybe patients, patient advocates, industry experts. So it's a real mix of knowledge in the space. I would encourage everyone to think about, well, who are the key ones we're targeting, and then think about whether there are different content types that might speak better to those. For some, if it's an announcement that's quite understandable, then it might only require one piece of content, but then you can always think about what other content formats can you use to kind of follow up and reinforce that original announcement. So how can we sell this 3 or 4 different times rather than once? And I think by doing the segmentation, that's almost like a bit of a shortcut to doing that. You're finding content that you can do for each audience, and then you're winning in 2 ways. You're speaking directly to people in the way they want to be spoken to, and you're also getting that announcement out there in several different ways.
Has there ever been a time where you've worked on developing content and in hindsight you think, oh, actually, I could have done that differently?
Yeah, I think one of the forms of content that I think we've tried to put more effort into how we present it is a lot of the awareness day kind of content. We found that over time, every company has gone down this route of just putting out content whenever there's a awareness day, whenever there's a month that they need to recognize. And it's become a very sort of hollow exercise. And we found that ourselves. Just putting out a tile about a day doesn't really cut it and isn't authentic. They don't perceive it as being genuine, or they perceive it as just being a sort of box ticking exercise. So that's really pushed us to think about how we can actually tell a story and share someone's voice around these awareness days. And most specifically, I think we do this a lot around Prostate Cancer Awareness Month because a key area of focus of ours is prostate cancer. And so we've really done a lot of work to try to go and share patient stories, share their experiences, and really illustrate to all our followers what the unmet need is in the space. And that, in a nice way, feeds into why the purpose of Telix, but it really lends a voice to all these advocates, patients, doctors that are doing great work that wouldn't necessarily get a platform to share it on.
That's incredible. On the topic of raising awareness for prostate cancer in a lot of the content that you're creating, is there a single quote, story, or interview where you've spoken to a urologist or a patient or someone in the field, and has there been a moment that's given you goosebumps and why?
There's been a few. I've done quite a few patient interviews now, and one that has always stayed with me is I think his name is Eddie. We interviewed him last year, and he's a prostate cancer survivor and now a patient advocate. It was when he was asked, "What was your first thought when you had prostate cancer?" And it was, "Am I going to die?" And that sort of comes up again and again as we do these interviews. We spoke to earlier in the year a physician that had prostate cancer himself, and he said, even despite the medical experience that he'd had over years and years, his first thought when he had cancer was death. Like that's, our instinctual response to it. And that I find really compelling because it sort of cuts to what we're trying to change with cancer treatment. Specifically for prostate cancer, it's not a death sentence. We already have great survival for prostate cancer if you catch it early, but people should really be thinking about it almost as if it's a chronic disease, something to be managed rather than a death sentence. Hopefully, in the future, products from Telix will play a role in that.
And so, how does that inform the work that you do? You go from trying to change that reaction from, am I going to die, to how can I manage this?
I think for how we've developed content, I'll use an example of last year we did Prostate Cancer Awareness Month. We had a series of interactive articles, but also interviews. For the social media, we had nice video interviews with these patients, advocates, and physicians, and they're linked through to sort of long form interactive articles about each of them. The interviews led how the content was developed. What came out was the place they started is getting a prostate cancer diagnosis or delivering a prostate cancer diagnosis, and what they see for the future and where they get to in all these discussions is just a sort of a place of hope. They're hopeful for what's been developed. They see the innovations that are happening in the space, including at Telix's, and they have a great hope for what that can potentially bring patients in the future. We've called this series Unmet because we're really speaking to the unmet needs in the space and what Telix is doing to meet those. It's really the personal stories that best illustrate those.
What has someone actually said to you who has lived experience, who said, I'm a survivor, or I've felt this way, but I've changed my mindset about it from death to chronic illness because, or thanks to.
What we hear is more during these conversations, during these interviews, the process that these people have gone through coming to that place. It's great to hear. Another side of the content development is hearing feedback from physicians telling them that, oh, I was able to show a patient the video you created and gave them a great sense of understanding and peace about the process or the treatment.
So you're putting all of this effort into creating that content to help people. Where are you getting the sense that the content you're creating is having the kind of impact you want it to?
It comes in a couple of ways. One is often the interviews we're doing or the people engaging with the patient advocates and advocacy organizations. We find that this is not just a great way to get the message out, but it's a great way to show appreciation to them for the work they're doing. And often they're really the unsung heroes. They don't get celebrated in the way they should. I personally find it a great way to build relationships with these stakeholders and show our appreciation to them for the work that they're doing. Doesn't happen very often, but hearing feedback from a physician, an investigator that says the content you produce really helps a patient feel peace and understanding about the treatment they're receiving, investigative therapy or something like that. So, in both those ways, it's giving back and giving the people who deserve the recognition, the support, what they need. It always surprises you what can come out of a good piece of content.
Thank you. For other content creators out there in health and complex industries, what are the top three things that you would say they need to start doing tomorrow as part of the content creation process?
I think a key one is to get out away from your desk and talk with the important people in your space. I think too often we're stuck at our desks just ideating on things that might be interesting without getting out and hearing what the actual stories are in our company or our industry. So I'd encourage everyone in that regard to get out, be inquisitive, have a conversation, show interest in people's stories in the industry, in the space, and you'll be very heavily rewarded for it. You'll get some great stories out of great content. You'll have the information you need to actually illustrate where your company's place is. I'd say also, and this is coming back to sort of content design, but look for ways that you can refresh, change how you deliver your content in style, in form. I often find I get more inspiration in that regard from industries outside health or just even in creative industries. And I'll use that as inspiration to then change how we present or edit videos or format videos. And then the final one is just really think about the segmentation approach. You really do have so many opportunities to tell your story, much more than just that one corporate announcement. So think about the different angles that you can take. And the great thing with social media, the great thing with owned media is that you can tell that story as many times as you want. So get out, instead of you pitch one angle to a newspaper and that's the angle they take, you can have five different angles and create five pieces of content around those angles. And that creates a much greater value for your investment in the project.
After everything that we've discussed today, how would you define impact?
I define impact in my space by people listening attentively to what we have to say. You want people to understand what you're about, and if you're able to achieve that, or at least move the needle a little in that direction, that's the most important impact you can make.
As someone who is responsible for content for a pharmaceutical company, that I imagine you've got a bit more room in the budget than other organizations to put out great content. Are you making decisions on how resources, as time and money is spent internally versus what you outsource with agencies, and how you make that work when it's such complex expertise?
You might be surprised, we're quite strict with our budgeting. We try to do as much as we can in-house and make it as efficient as possible.
So be honest with me, do pharmaceutical companies have more budget to work with? And is this a luxury that you think you've got more than others who might be trying to have an impact in the health space?
I think, yeah, that's the perception. And I think that's the perception people get from big pharma companies, some of the largest companies in the world. But for little old Telix Pharma, we're still at a stage where we're growing and we really try to develop our content in the most efficient way possible with low budget. We found utilizing sometimes external partners or agencies, we would get caught up in a very long review and changes process. So often we've found with content now, we go out to some help with production. So we might get a video crew to go to a conference. We might shoot a whole load of interviews with them, but then we keep that content on the back burner. And then when an announcement comes out, we'll sort of do the production ourselves. So I'll edit the videos myself and do all the graphics. So that's given us the flexibility to be able to keep our costs down with content development. We get a lot of video content out, which is often quite expensive to produce, but it also enables us to be quite nimble and push content out at a moment's notice. We can turn things around very quickly in-house.
I do think that you need to do a bit of myth busting because everyone thinks pharma has tons of money.
Yeah.
But also, it's interesting to speak to different companies and understand how many people they have doing internally
Mm.
versus what they outsource and where it works and where it goes wrong.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Thanks so much for all of these insights, Sam. Just to wrap up, I'd love to just ask, where can people find out more about TLX or contact you?
Yeah, the best place to find information about Telix is telixpharma.com and follow us on LinkedIn. That's our main channel, and that's where you'll see the bulk of my work as well. And follow me on LinkedIn. Always happy to connect with the people in the space.
Well, thank you. Appreciate the chat. Thanks, Sam.
Thanks so much, Natalie.